There was a vote that came down in California state legislature about trans people in sports, specifically grade school students being required to play consistent with their birth gender in sports consistent with their birth gender. We all know what Gavin said, Mr. Governor Newsom, not so long ago.
So like you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports, right. that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out and say no.
No, and I appreciate
but like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that. So that's
okay. So we know he said, I think it's an issue of fairness, buying into the idea, like using the word male, blah, blah, blah. This bill failed. It failed in the legislature. Every single Democrat refused to support it, and every single Republican voted in favor of it. In other words, Newsom, once again, is kind of a Republican, and I need everyone to know that, because his party doesn't agree that trans youth should be forced to play in sports that is not their gender or of their gender at birth, and blah, blah, blah. So, like, that is just setting the stage, Imara, to talk more broadly about the amount of anti-trans bills that have been coming at us and have been coming at trans people. Kind of this week also, the Arkansas bill, there's a new Arkansas bill that would allow anyone who facilitates a minor's social transition, including hairdressers and barbers that give haircuts that are seen as gender nonconforming, to be, subject to lawsuits or whatnot under the Vulnerable Youth Protection Act, a Texas bill that could make charge transgender people with identity fraud, fining them up to $10,000. An Iowa bill that just passed that eliminated, I think we've talked about, eliminated trans civil rights. So it's okay to discriminate against trans people. You in TransLash fight back against all of this through a lens of media, but just talk to me about that. Like, talk to me about where we're at and where we need to go when it comes to fighting this legislation on a propaganda level, like on a level of narrative and discussion.
Well, I think there's a difference between propaganda and narrative, right? Like, I just want to professionally make that distinction.
Sure. I'm very loose with the term propaganda because I like it, but yes,
they're not the same thing. And as a journalistic organization, we would not be a part of issuing propaganda. I mean, I think that one of the things that's really important to realize and for people to realize is that whenever you're talking about trans people, you're not really talking about trans people, right? What you are actually talking about is the infrastructure and the way in to authoritarianism in the US, right? Because whatever they're saying or talking about trans people, the point isn't for them to only remain amongst trans people. They're actually seeing how much they can get away with so that they can extend the same practices and procedures to everyone else. And they're actually seeing what works and what doesn't work. And so the degree to which they're able to have success with their anti-trans policies and politics, you can just set your watch to the fact that it's going to extend and expand, because one of the things that they realize with sort of this combination of this Christian nationalist and techno-fascist kind of cocktail that they're mixing with regards to our country right now, is that they know that ultimately when people discover what they're truly trying to bring about, that it'll be unpopular. So what they have to do is to begin to systematically disenfranchise larger groups of people so that those people are not able to participate in the body politic in a way to actually be able to disrupt their plans when they're fully implemented. So consequently, what it means is that this isn't about trans people. This is actually about everyone. And to the degree that they get to play on, transphobia, or even just the idea that this is, about the human rights of one specific group in America, is the degree to which they are able to be successful in their agenda. So I think that that's like, everyone needs to expand their aperture, widen their aperture, understand what's really at play and at work when they're talking about trans people, and also to realize that whatever they say, they're deadly serious about. I mean, there is a inclination to believe that they don't really believe what they're saying when they are targeting groups of people like trans people in this instance, and that's because, honestly, a lot of progressives and a lot of liberals writ large are transactional. They're just kind of like, they're just transactional in their politics. I support this and you'll support that, and then we'll all get together and support each other and move forward. But there's not really like a common vision. Whereas they're not actually transactional politicians and players. They are movement politicians and players. Like, they really believe in what they're saying. So when they say, like, we want trans people to be excluded from society, we think that trans people are fraud, we think trans people should go to jail just for who they are, they believe it. Like, that's not actually just loose talk. And they're playing you all to see what they can get away with. And to the degree that you don't care, or you're being dismissive, or you maybe quietly agree with them, is the degree to which they are actually manipulating you as a part of their larger kind of play for politics in America. And it's the same thing that's happening with the universities, for example, where, some people are like, well, on the merits, I might agree with the one thing that they're asking this university to do. So, for example, the University of Pennsylvania, to get them to not allow the players which they don't have to play in a gender which corresponds with their gender identity, right? There are no trans athletes at the University of Pennsylvania, period, full stop. So the ransom that they've undertaken to say, well, we're going to hold, nearly $200 million in funding until you change this policy. That's not about trans people. That's about getting academic institutions to counter them, because they realize that academic institutions like those in the Ivy League are big enough and strong enough to hamstring their plans and to disrupt what they want to do. And so they are trying to bring them to heel early on by using these things. So everyone just needs to get smarter about what's happening.
Yes. And we just talked about that when it comes to, speaking out about Palestine. It's like, it is about Palestine, but it's actually more broadly an effort to, crack down on any kind of speech or, again, the crusade against whatever it is, ethnic studies, Black studies, critical race theory, to the extent that exists, I'm like, that is what it is. It is much bigger than that. And I've argued that on this show a lot in terms of trans rights, is that, and it's so sickening as a cis woman, because we've seen it. We are now, second-class citizens to our uteruses or whatever, because of abortion rights being taken away across this country. You don't have to imagine, because it's literally happening right now, the restriction of people's civil rights. But again, it's going to come for, no-fault divorce. Obviously, same-sex marriage is already attempting to be dismantled, and on and on and on. And it's like, to what extent are we going to continue to allow trans people to be kind of just, like a punching bag, as if it's extreme, and I think I really agree with you about the vision. I do think that Republicans really believe they are truly that hateful. And I think, and perhaps maybe the goal of TransLash media is to put out and to humanize and to tell stories about trans people, about, as I think you have a segment on your podcast, Trans Joy, that can be this counter narrative. But I guess I'm wondering, it's like, if Democrats are transactional, how do you get them to actually care about trans rights as a window into broader, civil and human rights for all people? Is it about recentering policy proposals that sort of aren't necessarily trans specific, but are sort of like universal, but you know what I'm saying? Like, what is it? What are they lacking? Or is it just that they don't have enough trans people who advise them and don't know trans people?
Well, I think that one of the things we have to understand is that one of the reasons why the attacks on trans people are so successful is because they were designed to be. Republicans have put a lot of intelligent brain work, and I mean that seriously, into what are some of the ways that they could begin to crack the Democratic coalition and make inroads into communities that they would normally have conversations with in order to be able to eke out elections. And part of their research said that trans people, and specifically beginning with trans youth, but then expanding to trans people, was a way to do that. So one of the reasons why it's working is because they researched it and it's designed to work, right? It's really effective. And what that underscores is that whatever your bigotry is actually the vulnerability that allows for authoritarianism to thrive. It is the gateway to authoritarianism in this case. And I think that with regards to Democrats, I mean, there are a lot of Democrats that, aren't supportive of trans people, aren't supportive of a lot of groups. The Democratic Party is a combination of kind of a progressive party and then an institutionalist party, which I would say, which is like, what our job is to preserve institutions working in the right way. And if we preserve institutions working in the right way, then everything is fine and democracy is fine. And I mean, we had this conversation on Eamon's show. And so then when institutions begin to fail, the institutionalists are literally lost. They don't know what to do because that's all their answer is to everything. And so in this moment, institutionalists are frozen, right? And we saw that with, I think, what we said about Senator Schumer and some other people, which totally makes sense. I think the other thing that we have to realize about Democrats is that one of the reasons why we got here, one of the ways that Donald Trump was able to be successful is through the failure of the Democratic Party. One of the things that I've said many, many, many times is that the era of modern political campaigns began during the Bill Clinton campaign in 1992. And James Carville, ironically, was one of the stars of that campaign. And one of the rules that he came up with is that you do not allow an attack by Republicans to go unanswered for no more than 24 hours, right? And that was in 1992. That was like the standard rule. And every Democratic campaign that has followed that rule successfully has won since 1992, and everyone that hasn't has lost. And I could go through and take you through all the examples, but I won't.
So you're saying Carville was right?
Carville was right. You don't allow for ads, attack ads, and attacks on your campaign to go unanswered for no more than 24 hours.
Right.
Well, what happened with the trans attack ads is that it was the single largest ad buy of the Republican campaign, of the Trump campaign, were those anti-trans attack ads, the single largest ad buy. And they went for almost 30 days without any response from the Democrats, which means that you allowed yourself to be hammered by $250 million without saying anything. Yeah. And the people that they targeted with those ads are the people that gave them their margin of victory.
Yep.
And so the point here is that was political malpractice. And that's why I find it sometimes ironic that James Carville is out here being like, we talk too much about trans rights. We didn't say anything. We didn't even follow the basic rule that you set up, 40 years ago, if my math is off, 30 something years ago, you didn't even apply here. It wasn't even the case. So
you chose to ignore it. I mean, and I would argue
you chose to try to ignore it. And the thing that you tried to ignore ended up clocking you and knocking you out. Right. And so I think that we have to realize that, yes, the Republicans have been smart and have spent a lot of money and have been, very focused and strategic in the way that they have decided to use these issues since 2014, 100%. But it is also the case that one of the ways in which they succeeded was because of the failures and the shortcomings of the Democratic Party.
Have you ever been consulted like by a Democratic politician or somebody to be like, help us message around this, help us hit back? What kind of ad would you craft?
Well, if they asked me, I couldn't, because again of my role as a journalist.
Yes.
I can't I couldn't do that. But I mean, people have asked me what I generally think, right? And as I would tell people what I think, just like I would tell you what I think. And, I think that there just is a lack of seriousness, right? Yeah. And I think that there is a lack. Democrats do overall have no idea of what they're up against, just in general. Like, do not understand the scale, the resourcing, the focus, the viciousness, the seriousness of the party that they're facing right now. They still think that it is the party of George H.W. Bush. And because they know some Republicans in their family, that Republicans in reality are not where they are, but don't realize that the Republican Party wholesale now is a Christian nationalist and a techno-fascist party, period, full stop. Like, it's, and again, like, I don't, what I'm saying may sound controversial, but I don't think that's controversial. I think that it's just a fact. Like, if you look at the sources of what I'm talking about, they are embedded at the heart of the Republican Party right now. And that is just very different than a party that's used to sort of cricket-like rules when it comes to politics, where Democrats reserve usually their harshest amount of criticism for people within their own party, right? Yeah. And that's been a thing over the last 20 years without really getting serious. And because I think it's very scary. I think that if you really look this party in the eye and you see what they're up to and what their intent is, it is deeply frightening. It is deeply disconcerting. And so it's just easier to say it doesn't exist.
And it's easier to play at Chuck Schumer. Sorry.
No, go ahead. No, it's easy. Yes.
It's easier to say, you know, we've got this. It's okay.
That's right.
And, you know, I've been here before, Chuck Schumer. I'm the best leader of the party. And it's easier to say, oh, that wasn't a Sig Heil that was thrown up twice by both Musk and Bannon. That was just it was a weird flex. It's just like, nah, man, because what it would mean to admit that these people laud and love, Nazi parties.
That's right.
Would be very different. We would have to have a whole different conversation. And do we even have the apparatus or the institutions to have that conversation, to let alone to protect us?
That's right. I mean, like, these are people, like, pretty much everyone in the Congress are like, they all run student council, right? And so we're dealing with like student council politicians, right?
Yeah.
And that's like where their orientation was. I mean, I was on student council, but I'm not a politician. But like they're now like student council politicians, right? When what you need are people who really understand what's at stake, who really understand how quickly everything that we hold dear can go away, and how when it goes away you can't get it back, which means that everyone has to be very serious about protecting democracy. And by the way, this isn't actually for me about political views, right? What we are talking about now is that this is really a stake in the ground of whether or not we believe that government by the people is an ideal that is worth fighting for. And if you don't believe that, then go and do what you can to try to work with them. You're gonna get run over because they're not actually interested in cutting deals with you. But go do that. But I think that like they're just not there. And to your point, like, if you really believed, as we were told, that Democrats believe that this person is a mortal threat, they're an existential threat. There's no way that our country will survive 4 years of Donald Trump, right? And these are things that mainstream leaders of the party said. Like the standard bearer, the person who almost was president, said this, right? If that was the case, would you have sat through a State of the Union like that?
Yeah, no.
Do you understand what I mean? Like, there's a disconnect between the characterization of the danger. I think that objectively, the dangers that we are seeing, the attacks on press freedom, for example, on free expression that we are seeing, for example, and then do you just sit there quietly with most people just holding up a paddle saying, no, you're wrong, protect Medicaid? Like, I think that like the people, and this is also a really important point, Francesca, which I think is so crucial right now, which is that it just is a reminder that in a democracy, the ultimate guarantee of democracy itself are the people. It is not the institutions.
Yes.
Right? That like the best response that we have seen to this moment have come from uncoordinated grassroots movements of people all across this country that
Tesla
actually
takedowns.
that haven't been tapped into by the party, right? We're not talking about something where like the Democratic Party is behind this. Not like the Tea Party, which actually got funding from Republicans to scale up and to push out across the country.
Sure, they're not astroturfed. I mean, the right's losing their mind because they're like, this must be astroturfed. And they're like, no, we don't roll the way you guys do. We don't have the billionaire funders you guys have.
No. And so these are literally like small groups of people across the country that are getting together and deciding what they should be doing, disconnected from the party and the institution. And I would be, and if I was a Democrat, that would actually concern me, because that means that where you are and where the people are in two totally different places. And that, I think, should, just from a market standpoint, like, give you something to think about.
Yeah, well, I mean, seriously, you just said if I was a Democrat, and I know you are a journalist, you are trying to be nonpartisan. There, and we shy away. We don't do propaganda. We actually do reporting. But I did want to ask you, is it time for the Democratic Party to go away? Is it time for another party? Is that the push you think from a movement perspective? And I don't know where you situate yourself on that, but like that you would be like, it's time for something different.
So I'm just going to tell you, like, just again, analysis of American history. Parties disappearing is a very, very hard thing. It's only happened one time when the Whig Party,
right.
So I think that, like, that's the thing that we have to remember, right? That, like, it's kind of a hard thing to happen in American politics. What is usually more successful is the takeover of the party apparatus by people who want to take the country in a different direction. So I think that if you actually look at the modern Republican Party, what happened is their coalition party of hawks and Christian conservatives and the defense people and the low tax people and the libertarians, they were all totally swept away by the Christian nationalists and now sort of the techno-fascist, techno-nation people, however they decide to label themselves. So they totally remade that party. So that party was taken over. I think what's more likely in if you look at American history is something like that in the Democratic Party, where some group of people will end up taking control of it and taking it a different direction if the current leadership doesn't adjust to the market of the moment for where voters are.
I feel you. I mean, the last thing I'll say, it kind of goes to the very first thing when Kate was on, but I do feel like because of the way that the, psychos, libertarians, the Christian nationalists have taken over the Republican Party, that like the institutionalists have taken over the Democratic Party. And, and if they get their way, we're not going to be able to stop fascism, that is literally here, that is happening now. And so that's why I say this, like, it's too crowded. Like, I believe in big tents, but you actually have to listen to the base. You actually have to listen to the masses of people, the people who, as you suggested, help, who might have stayed home because they didn't feel inspired or because they were over advertised to by the Trump administration. Like, that's where I question. And again, the political hurdles for a new party are, I think, very insurmountable in the short term. But yeah, I mean, I just don't, the brand is bad. The brand is bad. It's all bad. And if, the institutionalists get their way, they're useless.
People also will vote for you, even if they disagree with you, if they believe that you will help improve their lives.
Yeah.
So I think that this idea that it has to be a big tent, I think that it has to be a tent that is appealing to as many people as possible through an appealing brand and messaging, all the rest of it, right? Like, that's for sure. But I think that what we saw last time is that there will be people who will show up and vote for you. I mean, it was on the other side. There will be people who will show up for you, even if they say that they don't really like what you're saying, because you made a promise to make things better for them.
And they believe your promise. Like the woman who believed that Trump was going to make IVF free for everybody. And it's like, girl.
Oh, I felt so sorry for her. She lived in Michigan. I remember that story. She lived in like Upper Michigan and worked for the Forestry Service. And I believe that
Yes.
she's now without a job. She is both without a job and without free IVF. And it was, I mean, this is also another thing I would also say. I don't only think that this is at the feet of the people, and I said this in Rolling Stone last year, I really do believe, and we're not supposed to say this, but if you look at politics as people getting the government that reflects where the people are and the quality of the people, I really do think that there is a character flaw in the American people right now. And I think that it is much easier for us to blame the politicians than to blame kind of ourselves and how we let this get here. Because there is no way that that people who say that we have the values that we do, right? We want kids to be safe, like all of the things that we could rattle off. We want kids to be safe. We want a country where everyone can thrive, like those types of like general things that even a lot of people who call themselves Republicans say that they believe in. There is no way that a country with those values would have ever let it get to this point, right? So there is some fundamental disconnect in our body politic within ourselves.
I think COVID proved that.
What we say and where we are. Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
100%.
And until we fix that, we're not going to fix the politics.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.